On today's episode of the Golden Legacy series, I'm delighted to be joined by Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. Tanni is one of Team GB's most successful Paralympic athletes, having competed in 5 games: Seoul, Barcelona, Atlanta, Sydney, and Athens, and taking home 11 gold medals. Following her retirement from competitive sport, Tanni turned to a political career. She has been an independent cross-bencher in the House of Lords since 2010 and strongly advocates for disability rights. Throughout this conversation, we discuss her journey from an athlete to a member of the House of Lords and everything in between. She's reflected on her childhood, including how she got the nickname of Tanni, and her early experiences with sport and the education system for disabled children. We delve into her sporting career, highlighting the importance of work ethic and resilience, as well as the need for athletes to plan for their life after sport. We also take the opportunity to delve into broader issues of disability rights, particularly the ongoing struggles young disabled people face in accessing physical education, and underscoring that the London 2012 Paralympic Games, whilst inspiring, haven't solved all inequalities for people living with disabilities, particularly around the issues of sport and sports access. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Tanni, thank you so much for joining me. I've known you for a long time and I've followed your journey from your amazing achievements as a very successful Paralympic athlete to everything you've done in the political world and is still doing. You've had such a powerful impact in both spaces, and I know our listeners will be inspired by your story, as I am. So for those listeners that don't know you, which is highly unlikely, but perhaps they don't know your full background, tell us a little bit about your background.
So I was born in Cardiff. I'm the second child, which probably says quite a lot about me. I've got an older sister, Sean. She's 18 months older than me. She was told there was going to be another baby to play with, so she was very excited until I came home from hospital and she realised that actually I didn't do anything and I was quite boring and I was quite small. And I was actually christened Caris, but my sister decided she didn't like that name. And when my parents went, "Da-da, here's Caris," apparently she went, "Ugh, it's tiny," and stood over my cot for about 2 days just going, "It's tiny, it's tiny, it's Tanni, it's Tanni." And then that's where the name Tanni came from.
Oh, that's so cute though, really.
Yeah. And I think my parents just thought, well, we'll call her Tanni for a bit and we'll eventually, go back to calling her Caris. And that never happened. And actually, I suppose my daughter's called Caris, but basically I'm married to an Englishman and that's the only Welsh girl's name he could pronounce. So it's kind of not some family legacy thing. He couldn't say Cyril or Seren or Angharad.
So Cridwell. I have a friend called Cridwell.
Yeah. I do think it's important that the dad of the child can actually pronounce the child's name properly. So
quite important, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I grew up in a really sporty family, went to mainstream primary school, which I was really fortunate enough to do. When it came to my time to go to high school, the education authority tried to send me to a special school. And that's where my parents took on the system and they used the work of Baroness Warnock, Mary Warnock, and basically threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to go to mainstream school. And for me, that was really important because the education at the time for disabled children was really poor. And it was at high school that I started playing sport and doing more sport. And there was a special school next door to my school. And I didn't know any of the kids there, but I did wheelchair racing there and it just went from there, really. I joined what was the Rookwood Paraplegic and Tetraplegic Sports Club, which rules at the time were only allowed to have 3 people with spina bifida. I was the second.
What? Really? Why was that?
I think it was just, there are a lot more children with spina bifida around then than there are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just because it traditionally came through a rehab centre. And there was quite a difference, I guess, in if you'd been through rehab and if you had a congenital impairment. And a lot of the clubs had those kind of rules that they didn't want it to be overtaken by people with spina bifida. And actually, they changed the rules soon after. But I think leads on to a much bigger question about what's happening in spinal units and rehab now. I mean, it's just people who go through spinal units barely get any rehab.
Really?
And and that has a big impact on life, society, sport.
Of course.
If you're not getting, my husband broke his back 40 years ago, incomplete L1 and a whole bunch of other bits on his spine. He's wobbly on his feet, but walks. And his rehab was 5-6 hours a day. And a friend of ours broke their back recently, very unfortunately, and he was getting half an hour every 2 days. So there's a big question. I mean, my life in Parliament now, we're talking about disability rights and benefits and all these things and integration into society. And we are still such a long way from equality.
I was about to say, but the perception there then is that person isn't as important, or that's the underlying, or doesn't need as much time, or doesn't need as much energy. That's what I'm picking up.
Or it's just a bit ableist. It's like, well, your life's over. There's no point rehabbing you. You're never going to do anything with your life. And he was told some of this stuff. Well, that's it. Your life's done now. It's like, what? So it's almost like we've gone back 100 years in some places. And don't get me wrong, I mean, being a Paralympian gave me a platform. But we've got to stop thinking about 2012 having fixed the world for disabled people. It was a stunning games, absolutely best 8 weeks of my life. But it gave us tube access at Green Park and King's Cross. And there was other stuff going on at the time. But I just hear a lot of people go, oh, but 2012. It was 13 years ago. It impacted the people who competed there and there were moments of inspiration, but it didn't stop what's happening now. It didn't give a kickstart to level boarding on trains. It hasn't shifted the dial, and it's not meant to. But it tends to be non-disabled people tell me that the dial's been shifted because of a stunning Paralympics.
I think that it was a stunning Paralympic Games, and there was some shifts forward, but the gap is so disproportionate that actually we can't say it's changed the world. And I agree with you on that. Just talking about Paralympic Games, you've actually competed in 5, and I believe you've taken home a total of 16 medals. What's been the most memorable moments of those games? I mean, you've got to have some real career pinnacles there, but also how has sport shaped your life before you've moved on to what you're doing now? And we'll come on to what you're doing now in a moment.
It shaped my life in loads of different ways. Actually, being physically active is the biggest part of my life. So as a child, my parents wanted me to be physically active, and I had 25 years diversity into elite sport, and then I'm back to being really, really important that I'm physically active. It shaped my life in loads of ways, partly about the work ethic, because we trained 2-3 times a day, 6 days a week, 50 weeks of the year. When I had my daughter, I had an extra 2 weeks off training. That work ethic, I think, is really important. It teaches you to deal with winning and losing. If you ask me my best 10 races in my career, the Paralympic medals might be a couple of them. And I think people assume, expect you to say, oh, I was very privileged, I won 11 golds. And people expect to say gold medal 1, gold medal 2, gold. And it's not. It's like, my parents were very different. Mum would ask me after a race, did I win? And my dad asked me, did I compete well? And those two things are incredibly important. Some of my best races were ones where I didn't win, but I couldn't have done anything else in that race to win. And I think it's important to have that kind of perspective. It gave me a platform, but also for most of my career, I did other things. I temped, I worked, I had jobs, I volunteered, I sat on boards, because life in sport is really short. And it was very important for me that I've got friends, Olympians and Paralympians, who retired before me, who struggled with that transition. And I think for me, you can't expect life after sport to be given to you. You have to kind of create your life after, and have some responsibility for it. Most of my career, I was planning for retirement because I could have got injured. Or again, a lot of this came from my dad. At the end of every year, he'd say to me, right, you spent all the money you've earned racing, you haven't got a pension. What are you going to do when you grow up?
I like your dad. I've never met him. He sounds like a very level-headed man.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because even now, there isn't really any money in Paralympic sport. There's not. And you can't build a life after sport. There won't be Paralympians, really, who earn enough money to never have to work. And actually, you should be working. You should be doing something. That was always at the back of my mind. And again, my dad would be, well, you might not get selected next year. So you've got to think of,
isn't there? There's that level. I mean, if you work hard and are disciplined in the workplace, like you said, you're training 5 to 6 times a day or a week or whatever, there's the chances if you're putting that effort in a normal job, you'll be staying in that normal job. But with being an athlete, there's always that fear of injury, fear someone's that little bit faster or stronger than you. And you don't have that extra bit. I hadn't really thought about that until you've mentioned it, but that must be sat over athletes all the time.
Yeah, I mean, then there's nothing you can do about if someone's better than you, or you don't fit in with the team, or you're not progressing. So I think I always had a very realistic expectation of your career can be gone at any time, and you can't sit around and wait. You've got to take some kind of ownership and control. And I think that really helped me in transition. I had quite a clear idea for most of my career what I was going to do. The plan actually was to, when I retired, I'd saved up money to do law conversion. because I did a politics degree. And the idea was to go into law. So I've sort of ended up in Parliament in sort of a similar sort of place, just kind of making it, not enacting it. Law and disability rights was always where I wanted to be.
And you're doing amazing things. And we all know that. You're a very public person. You're very forthright. You stand your ground. And that's helps non-disabled and disabled people sort of really think about what's important, but also move the dial forward. As a member of the House of Lords, how do you use that platform to influence policy, particularly around disability sport rather than disabilities?
Yeah, being in the Lords is kind of quite surreal. So I'm an independent, I'm a crossbencher. There's about 180 of us. So we don't have a party behind us supporting us what we do. And as a crossbencher, we have a lot of different views on the world. The reality is sport doesn't come up in the chamber very often, and disability sport doesn't. So we're doing a children's wellbeing in schools bill at the moment. And physical activity, sport, none of those words are mentioned in the bill. They're not there. So you've got to find quite creative ways to sometimes to have those discussions and debates. And the group of peers that work in sport, we sit on all political benches. We don't always agree with each other, but there's a decent group of us that kind of talk about, well, I'm working on this bill, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, and try and find ways to talk about disability sport. But again, this is something that hasn't changed. The special school system was not brilliant for children's education, but it did give them a chance to play sport together, where mainstreaming has made that harder. And also the pattern of disabilities changed. Things like, for my condition, folic acid means there are less children born like me. And so some of those opportunities are harder. And ParalympicGB realised last year on the back of the Paris Games that actually disabled children are not getting access to PE in schools. Now, that's been happening for a while, but actually trying to change that is not simple. And there's been lots of schemes and funding, but that dial still hasn't shifted. I mean,
no, it hasn't. I've been around for 15 years, and I remember having a conversation with Lord of Holmes back in 2012 about my frustration about the lack of opportunity for disabled children in mainstream school. But I think my frustration still remains about the lack of support that trainee teachers get before they even get to the classroom about understanding the needs of a disabled child in physical activity.
They get a few hours instruction on how to deliver PE for primary school teachers. So if you're kind of a sporty teacher, it's probably a bit easy, but PE is a really difficult subject to teach. I know there's all sorts of jokes about if you can't do something teaching, if you can't teach, be a PE teacher. I mean, they're quite offensive, really, because we're trying to integrate people, and especially primary school, where there's a massively different level of ability, enjoyment, exposure. And we don't expect children to do trigonometry without doing the basic maths, but we expect children to play sport without learning all the physical literacy skills. And that inclusion for disabled people is even harder, because I've seen it where parents of children who are blind or visually impaired have said, well, their school won't let the child do PE because of health and safety.
Yeah, we see
Well,
that a lot.
actually, it's really important, because you've got to learn to navigate the world in a different way. And actually, knowing your limitations, being fit and healthy is really important. It is kind of a worry where we are, just actually about a generation of physical inactivity generally. And then you lay a disability impairment on top of that, and it's even more worrying, because I do think, as far as possible, people should be in work. But actually, as a disabled person, you've got so many more barriers to climb over to get into work and to stay in work. Just to get to work is quite hard, that actually you need to be fit and healthy.
I honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. And part of it goes down to the whole system. It's not through the lack of teachers, and I just want to put that out there, that teachers don't want to try and learn. And we get some really proactive PE teachers or primary school teachers who do PE as part of their work and saying, I've got a child who's disabled. They may have disabilities, one of which might be being blind or partially sighted, or there might be a blind and partially sighted child. What can I do to help? What equipment do I need? So the lack of understanding is not an ignorance of them, it's of the system. I didn't know if you were aware, but Ofsted don't even check PE. It's not on the Ofsted. So they'll come and check that the maths and English is good and everything else is being taught. But PE is just overlooked, and we're becoming an unhealthier nation. And it's just right from the core upwards that these things need to be considered, and even more so for children with disabilities and for their families.
We got really close in Wales a few years ago, back 2013. I did a report for the Welsh Government, which was looking at physical literacy. And we asked that it have the same status as literacy and numeracy. And we
Yeah.
got very, very close to making that happen. And then, so in Wales, it's called Iestyn. And as the inspector, then there were some bad STEM results, there were some bad science technology results. And then there was a whole curriculum review, and it kind of got dropped. And that measuring literacy, numeracy, physical activity is really important.
I agree.
80% of women are not fit enough to be healthy. That has massive consequences for pensions, for society, for work, for bringing up your children.
Pressure on the NHS.
Yeah, that leads on to other stuff I'm working on in terms of pressure on NHS, is that it's not sustainable in its current format. And it's not a national health service, it's a national sickness service. And society is so far from where it was when it was created. But something like type 2 diabetes, which is preventable largely, is costing us $2 billion a year.
And some of that is down to lifestyle choices, isn't it?
Clearly.
Not all diabetes type 2, but some, or majority, I would say. We're very conscious that there's 2 million people living with sight loss in the UK, and they think that number is going to reach 4 million. This is World Health by 2050, and that's mostly down to lifestyle choices. Just thinking about sport and bringing things back to sport, the landscape of inclusion continues to evolve, doesn't it? What do you see are the main gaps? We've talked about schools, but the main gaps in inclusion in sport for people with disabilities, just as a general. What are the main pressures, do you think?
There's kind of a few. So some sports clubs are brilliant and some aren't, and some governing bodies are better than others. And I think you have to remember the Paralympics began because of discrimination, because mainstream sport didn't want disabled people. It created this movement outside mainstream sport. And there are some bodies out there will go, well, we don't do disability. Well, no, but you do the sport. So if you do the sport, you should do the whole of the sport. You don't pick and choose which bits of the sport that you do. I still think it's hard for disabled people to get into sport, to travel, to participate, find other disabled people, to compete against some people. I trained with runners for some of my career over certain distances. I couldn't train with a runner on the road because I was loads quicker. But sprinting, you can make some things work. Finding the way that people want to be included, I think, is a challenge. And it's more expensive to travel and to get to places. And actually, disabled people don't always have a lot of disposable income.
So I was about to say, I can't talk for all impairment groups, but I do know that 3 out of 4 people with sight loss are likely to be out of work. So straight away, disposable income, there's more pressures on that. So it becomes this ever-decreasing circle, doesn't it? You don't have the money, so you don't get the opportunity. So therefore, you have less social circles, you have less ability to be physically and mentally active in your mind. So that can create other problems. And what we're trying to do is push that circle the other way.
It's really difficult because the government have announced this week about wanting supermarkets to change their products, to take calories out. Well, okay, you take calories out, so what do you put in to replace? Substances, which actually aren't great for you either. And my daughter's 23. I remember talking to her about supermarkets now versus when I grew up. So when I grew up, you couldn't really buy ready meals. There was only kind of one vacuum packed type of meal you could get. I remember sort of instant noodles coming out and it being like, oh my, this is just amazing. Now there's half a row of instant stuff. And there's lots of good things that have come out of the food that we have available now. But people do eat more. Fast food is cheap. And if you haven't got a lot of money, actually, it's poor quality food can be, not always, but can be cheaper to buy. It's quite challenging saying people need to make better choices. Yes, because of course people should make better choices. But you can make better choices if you've got money to do it.
Yeah.
And
time. There's pressure. If we look at the bigger society, I don't know about your mum. My mum had a part-time job, was very much a stay-at-home mum, was able to cook fresh meals every day. I work long hours. I no doubt you do too. And there is a sort of a temptation to go and get those sort of things. Fortunately for me, I'm allergic to so many different things that I have to eat pretty clean. You've had such a diverse career as an athlete and a member of the House of Lords. And you've said earlier about getting your medals, that people would think that they're highlights, but actually some of the other races. It's interesting you say that because I remember I was at a talk once with Zeb Coe, and he said one of the best races he ever remembers was one when he lost He said, because I learned so much from it. And I remember that. It's not always about the winning, is it? But in terms of your diverse career, what have been your standout moments?
There's so many different, there's moments on the track. I remember breaking the world record for the 400 in 2002 and the Swiss Nationals. And part of the race plan, I was working on my start and we weren't really thinking about the time. And my first sort of 10 pushes, I didn't really nail. The weather conditions, the wind, everything was perfect. I broke the world record. I remember coming off the track and my husband, who was my coach, saying to me, yeah, your first 10 pushes weren't great. And one of my training partners, Jason, was like, yeah, have you seen the time? And Ian was like, yeah, we said it wasn't about trying to get a time because every race you go into is different. You're aiming for a time or a position or something else.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, we weren't aiming for time in this race. It was just about really nailing that start and acceleration. And Jason's like, yeah, look at the clock, Ian. And Ian kind of went, oh, right. And then he turned around to me and he went, you could have gone quicker if you'd nailed your first 10 pushes.
Oh my God. I have to say, just listen to you. Sorry to stop you there because we are going to talk about your standout moments. It sounds to me like you've had parents and a husband who push you all the time, which is a good thing. That's a really good thing. Like they don't sit there going, well done. They go, well done, but could have done that a bit better.
That's what I need. And that's what I like. I don't want family members who just go, yeah, that was mate, you're brilliant, you're amazing. Because then you don't get better. And I am a perfectionist. And so what are the moments? We used to have demonstration races at the Olympics as well. So I competed at 4 Olympic Games. So I did Barcelona, Atlanta, Sydney, Athens Olympics. And we competed in Sydney the same night Kathy Freeman ran, about half an hour before. And that was pretty amazing because we were pretty much on the finish line watching her race. And this is like an icon of Australian sport. And she became a friend. I met her a couple of years later and kind of became friends. And she's an amazing athlete and just very humble and very kind. And she just, that pressure on her, she was holding up so much on her shoulders at that games. The whole of Australia was on her shoulders. And so that was, competing then was cool. There was a race in Atlanta where the 10K the first day, there was quite a lot of prize money. And I came 6th. And the next day with the race that there was $100 prize money, I won. Would have been good to get it the other way. But the race on the second day was like an amazing race where I was just at one of my absolute best moments. And I broke the women's pack early and it was a 10-lap race, 1K lap. And I just broke the women's pack really early and then had to just like cling on for 10 laps. And actually Ian was there. He was on the sidelines and every lap he shouted at me, it's a good day to die. Which is quite funny. So that kind of became our... So I didn't like people saying good luck because it's not luck.
It's hard work.
Yeah, but there are these slight little moments where there can be a bit of luck, but it's not all luck. I just hated good luck. Instead of it, Ian used to say to me, it's a good day to die, which we mean it's, you put everything on the start line. Yeah. And for me, I really liked that because it was quite different. So yeah, if anyone heard me go into a race, Ian would say, it's a good day to die.
Just me thinking about your career, and you've won some amazing races, but you are possibly our most famous Paralympian. And talking about the opening ceremony in London and ziplining in, was it? I mean, how did that work?
So I got a phone call while the Olympics were on saying, would I like to be in the Paralympic Games opening ceremony? And I worked on bid and delivery and I had tickets for the Paralympic Games opening ceremony. And it's like, yeah, great. What do you want to, I'd love to. What do you want me to do? And they said, we want to put you on a wire and float you a bit above the track. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went to a warehouse in the East End of London. They put me in my racing chair and put me about 4 meters in the air. And it's like, okay, not sure. And being a wheelchair user is very static. And I was in the air and I was sort of moving and it was sort of moving from side to side. I was like, oh, gosh, is this what it feels like when you're standing and you're standing on 2 feet, that you sort of move a bit? And I was like, not really sure. But it's like, I'm going to be in the opening ceremony. So signed the contract. I got very excited, did tons of interviews about how excited I was. And they took me to the stadium and put me about 60 meters in the air. So we basically went up just below the height of the roof. It was horrendous. Absolutely. I went up once and I was holding the wires. Yeah. And I came down and the guy said to me, you do realize if the wires snap, it's not going to save your life. I mean, it was, and he was very, very sweet. And they sent me up a second time. And then I came down and I was like, I really don't like this. And he's like, we've got the whole crew here. We will send you up as many times as you want until you're happy. And you're kind of really conscious. These guys have been rehearsing for months and
Yeah.
they didn't want to be me on a wire. There were a couple of things that kept me going. So he had done wire work with some very, very rich and famous film stars, and they were alive. And I figured if this man worked for them, I was probably okay. And I kind of looked and thought, I've got the most experienced wire people in the world. But I basically said to him, there is nothing that will make me happy in the air. There is like nothing. So there is literally no point sending me up and down, because I think every time you send me up, I'll be worse.
I think I would be too. I mean,
And
if you think about it, that's like
horrible.
playing chicken with cars. You'd only want to do it
Horrible.
once. You don't want to keep doing it, do you?
And on the night, it was quite windy. They were debating how high they were going to send us. And I was like, don't tell me, because I will literally have my eyes closed. So I don't know if you send me 40 meters, 80 meters. I just don't tell me. I don't need to know, because I know what 80 meters looks like. I'd like to think it's 40. So just don't talk to me about it.
Yeah.
And he was amazing, because they sent everyone up maybe 10 minutes before we flew in. There were 6 of us that flew into the centre and flew out. And he was with me and he was amazing. And he was like, I will leave you on the ground as long as I can. And it's like, thank you. Because also, I think he recognised at that point, if I was in the air, every bit of it was horrendous, apart from the last 10 foot I came down. So they sent me up. I was there. We flew into the centre. And then when we flew back out backwards, then we were just moving. Basically, I came down, he unclipped me. And I went round the back of the stadium and threw up.
Did you?
Yeah, it was bad.
That's a confession and a half, isn't it? I bet you, though,
Yeah.
when you started that wheelchair racing with that school next door, you never thought you'd be in that position, did you?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, it was amazing to do. I'm very, very glad I don't like heights, and I face my fears. And I think it kind of shows that if you've got really good people around you, there's a lot that you can really push back. Sport teaches you all the time to push your barriers and to not be complacent. And it kind of was a different lesson of that. So I would never, ever do it again. But I'm glad I
Never
did
goes
it.
to school day. So
Yeah.
just linking that, because I'm sure if anyone's listening here and they're an aspiring young athlete, they might think, oh, one day I might be doing something crazy if I
Yeah.
get to become a famous Paralympian. What advice would you give to any aspiring young Paralympian at the moment, or a young person wanting to be a Paralympian, should I say?
Find a sport you love, because you don't always like it. And if you want to be good at it, you got to spend a lot of time doing it. And so you've got to find something that you love and that you're passionate about. And there'll be loads of ups and downs. There's tons of races I haven't won. Winning is only one part of what you get out of sport. So ultimately, I loved wheelchair racing. It, for a long time, was the most important thing in my life.
Yeah.
You've got to love it. Because otherwise, if you don't, when times get hard, you walk away. And giving up and walking and leaving are two very different things. I think sport teaches you to have resilience as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I see that in all of our athletes. I see a real resilience. I know you've moved on careers now, but I don't want to share the story because you shared the story at a meeting I once went to and I thought it was really funny. You were keeping yourself fit and I think you were doing like a fun run and some guy ran past you and said, didn't you used to be...
I've had that quite a lot. I didn't used to be Tanni
Do you wanna-
Grey-Thompson. I did a half marathon when I was 6 months pregnant on a handbike, and I was keeping my heart rate really restricted. And I was all right because I still trained all the way through being pregnant. But it's kind of a sense of frustration of like, you can't go flat out. And also at that point, I didn't have I had day sickness. I just threw up all the time. So I was kind of really struggling to keep weight. But being active was really important to me and keeping fit and healthy. I remember 2 people ran past me. One was a man who basically his running technique was beyond awful. It was like really, really bad. And then I got overtaken by a clown with big red shoes. And actually, Ian, husband, and my training partners had all finished quite a long way ahead and they were all sitting at the finish line waiting for me. And they all cheered for the clown. In about the final 100 meters, we got into a little bit of a sprint. They all cheered for the clown. And this poor guy who was running for charity across the line was like, why were you cheering for me? And it was like, because you were beating her. And I think this poor man was like, isn't that really mean? And they're like, no, we train with her. Like, we are her training partners. So yeah, there's been quite a few. I get quite a bit of, didn't used to be Tanni Grey-Thompson. I get a little bit of, BBC have got really good makeup artists, haven't they? Yeah, do. They genuinely do, yeah. I don't really wear makeup in the real world, but I always wear it on telly. And all you get, which is quite funny as well, especially if I've done something, well, it's either something deeply political or I've done a quiz show, because I'm quite happy to embarrass myself on a quiz show for charity. If it means a charity I support gets money, I'm cool with that. And you'll get people stop me in the street and say, you know that jacket you had on a news night? And you're like, yeah. Well, we didn't like it. And you go, oh, right, okay. And I said to my husband, or I said to my wife, I said to my child, and we all agreed, it made you look really shallow. And you go, oh, right, okay. You're in their living room. I normally agree and go, yeah, you're right. Oh my God, I'm not going to wear it again. Thank you. Because it's stuff that my sister would say to me, which is fine. My sister can. But I think it's really important to recognise, if you're in someone's living room, they treat you like family because you're in their room. And it's nothing that my family or my training partners haven't said to me. So I remember doing one really serious speech in the chamber and ringing, and I knew my sister had watched, and I rang her and said, what did you think? And she went, you should really make an effort to brush your hair before you go in the chamber. And so I think, I don't know, my hair's always really short. I think it was just sort of sticking up a bit at the back. And she just said, I don't really listen to what you were saying because your hair looked really bad. Okay, thanks.
I must tell you a story. Again, it's about somebody in sport. So Bobby Charlton was a very good supporter of BBS, and his lovely wife, Lady Norma, came to an event, a football event for blind and partially sighted children. And of course, he's a very well-known person, bit of an icon in football. And he wasn't being left alone by all the parents trying to get photos with him and stuff. After a while, this little boy came up who was partially sighted. So he was about 8, this little boy, playing football. And he comes up and he goes, who are you then? And so Bobby said, oh, my name's Bobby. Why is everyone hanging around you? He said, oh, because I used to play football. He goes, were you any good? He said, Bobby goes, yeah, I think I was quite good. That's all right. I've been quite good. And he goes, all right then. I still don't know why they're hanging around you. Wonderful.
I get youngsters who come and say to me, I've watched you compete. And it's like, you've watched me on YouTube. Because I retired before you were born. But you know what? You say about Sir Bobby, he was, without going through the whole story, he was incredibly kind to my sister and my brother-in-law. Just absolutely incredibly generous, lovely people who are just kind of there and support and just very kind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and I would put you in that bracket too. You're always there to help. The fact that you say, I'm okay to make a fool out of myself by going on the telly, so long as I'm doing it for a charity. Yeah. Some people would say no, especially somebody who's in the political world, but you're like, if I can help, I'm going to help. And we know that you make a huge difference. I need to wrap up soon. Before I do, I just wanted to ask you, British Blind Sport are doing this Golden Legacy series to show our 50 years in sport and the changes that we've made. Is there any message you'd like to share with our audience?
For me, it's really important to be physically active. Sport is a byproduct of that. When we talk about sport, we think of competitive sport, elite sport. That's brilliant. Was a big part of my life. It's actually just being active and just doing stuff that helps you live your life to the best it can. Now, I do some kind of physical activity every single day. I played basketball a little bit when I was 13. I started playing again a bit. I am completely rubbish. Actually, I did have a 13-year-old in the team say to me, have you ever played any sport? Yeah, a bit. And he's like, follow me, I'll show you what to do. Spin me around twice, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. Wheelchair race in straight lines, occasional curve. But it's really important to be physically active. And in this sort of challenging world that we live in, it's even more important. And whatever that is, it can be going out to a club, it can be a gym. You can do stuff in your own home. I do most of my activity at home. I do loads of really boring knuckle rotator cuff exercises as they protect my shoulders. I do it with a couple of cans of soup every day. But be active and find a way. Don't let people tell you can't. There are creative ways you can do it, and you'll feel better for it, both physically and mentally.
And you said earlier as well, about athletes, find a sport that you love, find something that you love. That's a message that we try and say to people, is just enjoy it.
That is
whatever
really
level.
Important. Yeah, have fun and be active.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you for hours. That's the story of the 13-year-old just made me laugh at the end.
Thank you very much.
In all the great work that you're continuing to do. We're really, really proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really kind. It's amazing to know that the support, because it's very interesting at the moment, But sports at least give me loads of resilience to keep fighting. So we'll keep doing that.